I'm Dazon. Hey, and you're listening to Visible and Unseen, chronicling HIV in Black life, then, now, and next. We're amplifying stories and highlighting voices of Black folks in the movement. Some you know, and some you should know. Now let's jump in. And we are here, Visible and Unseen, chronicling HIV in Black life, then, now, and next. And right up next, I'm super excited. Ace Robinson is in the house. Hey, Ace, so glad to have you here with Visible and Unseen and with Dazon. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you, as always, because you're phenomenal, amazing, and all those other superlative adjectives.
Thank you. I'm learning
TRUTH.
I'm learning how to just receive. So thank you so very much, Brother Ace. And the dapperfiedness of what you're wearing today is beautiful. Thank you so very much for bringing.
I have received 2 comments on my jacket today, and as someone who is, what do they call it, fashion challenged, that's a lot for me. So thank you.
Oh, well, see, you're all moving in your own spirit, and that's what shows through. So thank you for that. Here's my first question for you, Ace. How has the HIV movement become an industry, and how does that affect the lives of Black and Brown people from where you sit or have sat?
The fact that it is an industry, I say it goes both directions. So when I look at what the HIV movement was in 1981 to really 2010, it was mostly led by advocates who had good connections in Washington, good connection with people who had deep pockets, good connections with other public health entities. And when I say that, I'm really speaking about people of a certain demographic and a certain gender identity. So if you are not a white man, specifically a white gay man, the likelihood that you are going to be in leadership in the HIV response is really nothing. Like, because if you look at the individuals, like I'll just go back in time. When I was hired into this role, there was an article that came out about me where I was the 6th Black gay man working for a leading an HIV organization that was not specifically for Black people. So we're always allowed to get hired for the Black people roles to be in leadership. But we're also allowed to be hired for in the predominantly white institutions to do coordination, to do community outreach, but never make decisions about money, about the direction of the agency. So when I say HIV Inc. Became like a reality, it was really following. I think when people talk about capitalism, if we didn't look any different than the Fortune 500 companies. Our boardrooms were all white. Our leadership was all white, predominantly male, and there was hardly anyone who looked like you or me. On the other side is the part that is when we're looking at it, went from advocates to people who have professional, academic, and lived experience mixed together to really driving the movement forward. And when we look at where the HIV response is today, you have to have all of it. Mm-hmm. Because what we have found, not only were our communities left behind, but our communities, when we were brought forward, we didn't have the same opportunities to say, oh, how are we going to do accounts payable? How are we going to make sure that our HRSA grants are amazing? How are we going to make sure that we are going to be the first people that the CDC come to when they have a new opportunity out? All those things take a little bit of experience matched with that lived experience that is vitally important to driving it forward. So HIV Inc. has both sides of it. There's the bad side and the good side. But when I'm going to lean into the good side and say, we have seen the response to this epidemic start to reflect our community, and we're starting to see major steps forward. When I see people like Kay Hayes, Dr. Timothy Harrison, Harold Phillips, Dr. John Kinzik, Winnie Bayama, we're looking at having Black leadership across the globe, not just at the Black-centered or the BIPOC-centered organizations.
Right.
We're seeing it. We're making global decisions. We're making national decisions. We're making decisions across the states, across the world. And that's the part that I'm really going to lean into. That I see the HIV Inc. In a much better light than I did when I began my career.
I love that. I think that overall, not just a perspective, but that overall framing of where we've been to who we are now. And you're also engaging in along with the leaders and the leadership, you're also engaging the deciders of town, research frameworks and types of research, as well as what gets researched, especially with Black and brown people. And that we look at all of these different enterprises within HIV Inc. and find that same mobility, so to speak, if you will, for Black and brown people across. It ain't equal, it ain't yet equitable, but it is at least it's tangible. You can see it, and I also see the outcomes from that. That there are improvements in our ability and our capacity, but there are also improvements in our impact and our outcomes. And I appreciate you for being able to lay that out and not demonize and villainize the whole industry, which is usually the characterization that we give HIV Inc. So thank you for that. So taking it to Ace himself, how do you find a balance as a clinical practitioner and a community advocate in the movement? You just talked about making tough decisions. You talked about being in these leadership roles where you're one of 6 in the history of at least the experience that you're occupying now, but you're also in these streets, as they say. How do you balance that?
I'll be fully transparent. It's not easy. It's hard. It's draining. And so before this turns into a whole therapy session, I'll share with you. I was one of 6, right?
Yeah.
One of those 6 passed away a few months ago with no notice. Right. Kirk Myers-Hill. And when you look at how draining it can be to be in the community that's most impacted in the United States, I'm a Black gay man. So by scope and scale, the most impacted in the United States. When I used to work in South Africa, when we did work with the queer community in South Africa, I remember we had one trial where we just had to follow people who are not living with HIV, and how my staff were like, that's impossible, because every time we screen someone who's a Black gay man for HIV, we know they're going to have a positive result. So it's like, I think in some of the studies they say between 75 and 95% of gay men in sub-Saharan Africa are living with HIV. And I think the one part is like I have to take care of myself. I have a family, I have a child. I have a job where I have 50 people who are counting on me to make sure that they get their paychecks every week. And I have a response to the movement that I want to be involved in, and making sure that our voices are at those tables. Mm-hmm. To say that juggling that has been easy would be a total lie. There's times where it's overwhelming, and there's times where I think I'm doing okay. I'm like, oh, I can be on the plane here, I can work, I can do this, I can take care of my kid, I can take care of things at the agency, everything's fine. And then there's times where you just get overwhelmed, and it would be disingenuous, it would be really a bold-faced lie for me to say that there haven't been times where it is overwhelming. So what do I do? Mm-hmm. I have therapy every other Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. And when I tell you that I rearrange my work schedule, my personal life, my travel, I will not be anywhere but in a quiet space, or at least a space where I can be free of the madness for at least 1 hour every other week, and I hold to that. Whenever possible, I do my yoga, I do my mindfulness, I do all those things that you have to do. And one thing that we have found in our community, specifically in our community, is that we don't spend enough time investing in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to model behavior, because I know some people are watching me. And they're all like, oh, Ace is doing this and doing that and da-da. But you know what else I'm doing? Baby, I am on vacation sometimes. Hello. And when I'm on vacation, you'll see you everything that you see on my social media is work related, but suddenly you see pictures of me just smiling, just happy, glistening with all this melanin. so excited. And so I make sure that I do that because it's hard. It's like it's that balance, and it has to be intentional. You don't accidentally have balance.
Yeah.
You have to carve it out and literally have structural interventions. It's blocked on my calendar, and like everyone can see on my calendar, it says therapy
All
12 to
right.
1. You can't touch it. Nobody can touch it. My mama can't touch it. I said my mama can't touch it. Nobody can touch it. Thank you very much.
That is modeling self-care for you, as they say. I love it. Thank you. And yes, people are watching, including me. That's why I was saying healing goals, healing goals. I think that's great. So you've already touched on it, and so let's just dive a little bit deeper. African people do bear the brunt of the global HIV epidemic, and it's time that we come to some reckoning around that. And African American people bear a disproportionate amount of the U.S. HIV epidemic. And you've worked in both spaces your entire time in the movement. What can Black Americans learn, or what can Black Americans learn from what has been achieved on the continent and vice versa? And I know that there's a lot of news, even as of late, but from the work that you've been doing, what's the bi-directional learning opportunities here?
The first piece is focusing not on our community, but focusing on the people who are charged to serve our community. And I'm really speaking about the doctors, the nurses, the medical assistants, the community outreach folks, the person who works at the front desk, pushing them to make sure that they're going to provide culture responsive and timely care. So whether I'm working in Botswana, which is like has a really great success rate when it comes to HIV response, whether I'm working in Haiti, which is not doing well at all in its HIV response, or if I'm working in somewhere in the west coast of the United States, which is also not having a great response from a global perspective compared to Botswana. But the one thing that you look at, what are they doing so differently? What are they doing that's great? They are making sure that everything's community centered and being very upfront when they're not meeting the mark. Because what did I talk about? I was talking about if you're a Black gay man, there are certain countries like we're watching what's happening in Uganda. We're watching what's happening in Kenya. We're seeing certain countries that are demonizing and potentially giving you a death sentence if you identify as a queer person.
Right.
So all that being said, within our clinics, we also know that we have to be unapologetic in making sure that we're serving individuals and going with a mind of Ubuntu. Each one teach one, I think is one way we say in the US, that I need to make sure that the person who is least supported gets that support. So when I'm doing work and when I've done work in Sub-Sahara, we focus a lot on adolescent girls and young women, and a lot of the clinics are really focused on supporting those individuals. But remember the Men's Initiative came out of PEPFAR right before the pandemic, and they were like, oh, if you're a man walking into these clinics, you feel that it's a women's space. And if you're in a part of the world where there's gender separation at a high level, but the only HIV clinic in town, it feels like it's a women's space. And then you add another layer that if you're a gay man, that like you're really not welcome there. What does that look like? And so what I've seen when I'm looking at like some of the successful models out of places like Durban, some things that are happening in Cape Town, some things that are happening in Navan, but like I want to be very clear that there are successes that we can take and bring here. Because when you look at where we have taken things when it comes to innovation and healthcare delivery, innovation and community health workers, all that comes from Sub-Sahara. And so like when we're saying like, oh, you just can't put a Black face to work in the community. You have to have a Black face who has similar experiences, lived experiences, who are going to speak to community. Like I'm not going to go in what I found in the US is that we did find a lot of race matching, but not gender matching, not sexuality matching. Like if I'm doing this work with the trans community, I identify as a cis person. I have no business working with the trans community in that way. So like I have to make sure that I get out of the way, because like if I'm not getting out of the way, then I'm a problem. So those are the things that we can take from a lot of the work that's done in Sub-Sahara, because like all the success stories are there, and we cannot talk about what's happening with our political leaders being anti this and anti that when we look at what's happened in Sub-Sahara. Like the folks in Kenya and Uganda are not they don't have They don't have an ownership of anti-LGBTQ plus hate. So when we've seen this around the globe, whether you're speaking about Russia, whether you're speaking about Sub-Sahara, whether you're speaking about Argentina, and whether you're speaking about Baton Rouge, it's all the same. And so what we have found is that, like as a former boss of mine, Linda Gale Becker, said, you can go under them, you can go over them, you can go around them, or you can go through them, but you're going to keep going. And so that's the piece where we have to look at, oh, how did you get around this type of
Right.
political environment? How did you
Right.
get around this type of clinical environment? And how are you able to serve people? Because those success stories are applicable to what
Yeah.
we're doing, and
Yeah.
we can take bits and pieces, maybe like 60%, maybe 90% of what somebody did across the world, apply it to what we're doing, and have better success.
That's right. And from the standpoint of the politics or the politics of it all, because we also know that that's muddied between the West and Sub Saharan Africa, where there's been so much more activity of codifying hatred against queer folks, right? And so there, it seems just in the way you just described it, is that that's one of the places where race is not our immediate question mark, right? Because whether it's the governor of Florida or whether it's the governor of Georgia, Texas, or any other state in the United States, versus being one of the leaders, and I'm going to wait for him to do his thing. One of the leaders or any of the leaders who are leading their parliaments, leading their parties, leading their governments to represent honestly what the people are saying or wanting, that there's a similar national comparison that happens there, that you can adjust for race, because now it's just about difference because of gender and sexual identity, right? And so it would seem to me that that political lesson is something that we have to figure out and learn from a Black solidarity standpoint, because this is the one thing that you can adjust for race. And if we do that, then we're no longer centering from the margins on the people within the epidemic who are still impacted the most by these kinds of political decisions. And that's Black queer folk.
Right. And when we're looking at, yeah, let's talk about what happened when Nelson Mandela stepped down as president.
Okay.
The collective fear within the queer community
Mm-hmm.
of South Africa was palpable. You could feel
Mm-hmm.
it, because no one was going to talk to Mandiba and say that we should really instill a level of homophobia, like why he was living. When
Right.
Mandela passed away, the former president who's always in and out of jail right now, Jacob Zuma, when Zuma came in and Zuma said, when Zuma said while he was running for president, that if I was to meet a gay man, I would knock him down, meaning I would hit him, knock him out,
Mm-hmm.
knock him down. That was like someone who was like on their way to being president of
Right.
the Republic of South Africa. And knowing that we have to have leaders who can support individuals who are not necessarily at their dining room table is vital. Because there are people who, like if you and I were the royalty of the world, we go between the two of us, we would have blind spots.
Yeah.
And so understand that you have a blind spot, and making sure that we are the type of people who are going to say, I'm like, I was just speaking about the trans community. I'm not the person who can speak on behalf of the trans community. I only know from listening to people share their stories, or from reading academic papers, what's happening with the trans community. What I do need to do is make sure that there's someone in leadership who represents that community and pushing that forward. Because those are those pieces that I think it goes without, and that doesn't go without saying, we have to have supporters who are not from our own particular identity. Because like if I'm pushing, then for this community over here, making sure that I'm getting out of the way so other people's voices are heard, that makes it louder. So like when you look at speaking of South Africa or speaking about the United States, like when you look at when the Department of Labor in the United States had a trans man in leadership, I mean, like there was like bells heard around the United States for that, because it was all like, oh, that person wasn't in the trans role. They weren't in the LGBT role. They were Department of Labor. That's generic. And like, who cares? Like, so we're just looking at someone as they have the skill set, and you see that, because like I was saying, people are watching, and people are feeling it, and people are feeling empowered. And then when we're looking today, I mean, like let's be real. It's Pride Month. we're celebrating Pride Month and
Yes.
around the world. And we're also being with the reality that queer youth are having suicide ideation and attempting suicide at higher rates in the U.S. Probably that we haven't seen since the Bush administration.
Right.
Like that's where we are, and we have a Democratic president, but you can't overcome all of that vitriol and hatred. Where it doesn't matter if you're in L.A., where they're trying to kick out a group that not honor a group of individuals who spend their entire lives raising money for underserved populations, or if you're like in a school and one of the lower parts of the world where someone breaks into the school and burns the pride flag. That like this isn't the I didn't just name places in Alabama. I didn't just name places in Kansas. I named places in very liberal parts of the situations in very liberal parts of the United States. So we have to be able to support each other.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with the question, and with listening to you explain it, is that we're also talking about the solidarity that's needed, that humility that's necessary to understand when it is my space and when it isn't, and to step aside or to get out of the way, but to be right there alongside and with, and sometimes in following. So I love the way that you have understood and helped us understand that the connections between the queer identity is also immediately connected to the HIV epidemic and the movement and the response. And that even where there has been some successes around HIV movement, there's still a lot of regression, a lot of backsliding, if you will, and even some pivoting away from a forward move around being an inclusive society, so that issues like HIV and all the other things that intersect with it are not as disproportionate or disparate or even as exacerbating as it is for Black and brown people, no matter where we are.
And that solidarity piece is right on point. As the epidemic in the United States gets blacker and queer, we suddenly, for pretty much the first time in US history, have seen politicians attacking HIV services, saying like, oh, we're not sure if we need this.
Yeah.
Like, not a conversation you could have gotten away with in 1985. You wouldn't be able to pull it off. Like, oh, it's like,
we were just ramping up, right?
Right. And can we look at like something like PEPFAR? People are like wondering if that's PEPFAR is the presidential emergency plan for AIDS. So like if people are actually challenging whether or not PEPFAR was a good idea, whether that was a good investment in money. And if you don't know the difference between the HIV response in a place like the Republic of South Africa versus the countries that are directly north that had access to that funding and access to treatment, and what did that mean for people and being able to like keep people alive, like you just it's just the reality of I think our stats speak for themselves. Going in statistics, and like I can't, and like I always say this one statistic and people always stop when I say it. If you are a person living with HIV on the planet Earth, there is an 85% likelihood that you are a person of the African diaspora.
That's right.
85%. So period. Brazil, yep. But don't forget, Brazil has more descendants of African slaves than the United States does.
That's right.
So like Brazil, it's predominantly Black and Moreno epidemic. United States, predominantly Black epidemic. So like, and then we have Sub-Sahara. You start putting it all together. Like our reality is like, we know like who is most impacted. That's and right. That this might become an orphan disease if we don't keep pushing and having levels of solidarity, because I don't need to tell you what's happening with sickle cell anemia. I don't need to tell you about what's happening with maternal morbidity rates, because just about Black people, the funding suddenly goes away. And if you want me to talk to you about COVID-19 or Mpox, I got all day.
We're going to have to pull that one onto a next season, and I'm happy to do that because I know you can. I got one more question for you, because I think that as you're talking about what we have to do and what we have to recognize that isn't being done and how we will not succeed if we're not doing that, I'm sure you're thinking about who else behind, beside, next to Ace Robinson is going to take this on. So tell us, who's next? Who are you passing the baton to or over to, or because I called it the other day. It is a relay marathon. It's not a relay race. It's a relay marathon. Who are you passing on to?
You might have heard me give this response elsewhere, because I know I make some people upset with this response, and you can figure out why on your own. It's not my choice. I don't get to choose who the baton goes to. I am not the person who's going to groom the next individual. If someone comes to me and asks me for support, I will give you my time. I will give you my energy. I will make sure you get where you need to be. But those Gen Zers and Gen Alpha folks who are coming, who will hopefully take this to the end, I have ideas of who I'm like, oh, they're amazing. But I think you're amazing in my mind, in my model of the HIV response. I need someone who doesn't think like me, because clearly when I talk about blind spots, Dazon, did we end the HIV epidemic during our time? Did we? Because it's 2023. Did we do it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I ever expected that, but I certainly know I'm not being let down, because I don't think I expected it. Yeah.
And when I'm saying this, all like, there's somebody who's going to come behind us, who's going to look at all we did, take 50%, 10%, 90% of what we did, learn from it, and create something in their own image that's going to be better than we could have ever imagined. Because what we're doing today is better than the stuff that they were doing in the 80s. It's better than what they did in the 90s, better than what they did in the 2000s, but probably better than the 2010s. But, that's it. We can still argue about that. But, so what we're doing today just keeps improving. And so in 2040, who's sitting in my seat, who's sitting in your seat, who's sitting in all these other seats, these are going to be individuals that I say that we should not choose. I say they choose themselves, and we get the hell out of their way. Because if we're selecting them, then I call it a selection bias. If I'm hiring somebody for my organization, I need to make sure that I have a Gen Zer on the panel. I need to have someone of this gender identity on the panel. I need to make sure that those blind spots are being covered. Because if it's just me, or if I have an outsized voice in choosing that person, it's not going to be the right person. Because I'm choosing somebody who is going to respond to the epidemic of the 2010s and 2020s, not of 2030 and 2040.
I love it. So, in other words, you're passing as you think future, but act in the present. So you do what you do, and you let the universe determine who gets to do the next do.
Right. Because when someone's ready to reach and grab that baton, I better let go. I better let go.
That part. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I think that is exactly where we need to close this conversation, because I think that's what a lot of people, especially those of us who are long in the tooth in this work and in this movement, have to hear and have to know. And I am so grateful to you for bringing it to us. And I am grateful if it's controversial. We want to stir up some conversation around how we have made these contributions and what contributions we need to continue to make, and what we expect, that we don't even know what we expect, but that we know that these contributions have to go long into the future to meet the needs of Black folk in this epidemic. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Brother Ace Robinson.
Oh, and happy Pride, everybody. You see the Keith Haring picture behind me. Yes, happy Pride, everybody, and go have some fun. And this is going to be a resistance Pride, because this is all about the resistance right now. So go out and enjoy yourselves, and be strong in who you are and who you want to be, and making sure there is some 7-year-old child who's watching you and learning. Trust and believe. Trust and believe.
Thank you for listening to Visible and Unseen. I'm your host, Dazon, and I'm also the founder and president of SisterLove Incorporated. To find out more about this podcast and the work we do at SisterLove, visit us online, www.sisterlove.org, or follow us on Instagram at SisterLove Inc. And tune in next time for another episode of Visible and Unseen. And much appreciate love.